Hello, all. Welcome back to Foundational Greek, and today we'll be introducing verbs. So, what is a verb? A verb is a word that describes an action or state of being. Now, what in the world is a state of being? Well, we'll talk about that later. However, an action is a thing done or an act. You can see these in these simple sentences. Tom hit the ball, and Greek is a heavenly language. In English, verbs could have persons or change by persons, which are the first, second, and third person, or I, you, he, she, book, etc. Notice how the verb am in the following sentences change to is when the subject changes to third person. This is called a verb inflection. This can be explained further when other verbs add an s at the end of the verb where the subject is a third person singular. Therefore, verbs also must agree with the subject. On top of it, verbs can also be modified or inflected by the number or from the subject is, such as when the subject he becomes they. And if that happens, the is becomes a are from he is to we are. English also has a tense which refers to time and place. Look at the following three sentences. I study in Greek. I will study Greek. And I studied Greek yesterday. Notice how the verb study changes depending on the time the verb is expressing. English also has a voice, which refers to the relationship between the voice or the verb and subject. When the verb is active, the subject of the verb is doing the action, such as I walk the dog or they call the preacher. On the other hand, when the verb is passive, the subject of the verb is receiving the action. Fido is walked by Taylor or they're called by the preacher. English verbs also have mood, which refers to the relationship to reality. We'll dive in this in more detail in another lecture. Now for Greek, like English, Greek verbs communicate person, number, voice, and mood. Greek verbs also must agree with their subjects along with English. Greek verbs, like English, have no gender, but communicate number like English does sometimes, but Greek is more intensive. For voice, Greek has an additional voice to English's active and passive voice. This is called the middle voice. The middle voice expresses an action involving personal interest, such as I give an object to someone for my own personal interest. Some verbs are even used only in the middle voice since the verb is always understood as a verb of self-interest, such as the verb I lie in Greek, which is pseudomai. However, in Greek, there is no tense in Greek whatsoever. What does that mean? Well, Greek verbs do not communicate time like in English. Instead, they communicate aspect. And what in Jove's name is an aspect? An aspect is the sense in which how the author chooses to conceive or view the action, or in layman's terms, is the author's perspective of the action. Time, on the other hand, is not communicated from the context of the text, or it is communicated for the context of the text and not for the verb itself. Now this might sound like a definition that might go over your head and very hard to understand. So let's explain this with a diagram or a picture. So overall, like imagine there's a band going through a city, playing their music, and marching at a parade. You got special tickets to see the band up close to the parade. This is expressed as the presence form of the aspect, since you're up and very close or even participating in the said action. Now, a friend who didn't got the same tickets as you and is sitting like in a balcony, but he still went to see the band marching in the parade and unfolding before his eyes. This would be described as the imperfect form of the verbal aspect. Or things like maybe there's a helicopter taking footage in the parade, broadcasting into the news about the whole situation of the parade. This would be described as the perfect form. Or maybe some astronauts or observe the parade for the moon as they see the situation going on Earth, they'll be described as pluperfect. And lastly, next day, get a news article describing the whole parade events. And since it ended yesterday, this would be described as the aorist form of the verbal aspect. Now, having this in mind, let's dissect the aspect even more. In Greek, there are three fundamental categories of aspect. The first category is the perfective aspect. The perfective aspect looks at the action as a completed whole in its entirety. The perfective aspect also looks at the action from an outside perspective. This action form or tense, quote, quote, is the form in this perfective category. And the aorist aspect usually views the action as complete, as he mentioned earlier. The second category is the imperfective aspects. The imperfective aspect looks at the action as in progress, as developing or unfolding, or the eternal viewpoint. The imperfective is more a close-up view of the action. And the present and imperfective form or aspects or tenses are the two forms of these categories. The present is a very close-up form of the imperfective aspect, where the imperfect form is a more distant imperfective aspect than the perfect form. The last category will be the state of aspect, which looks at an action as an existing state of affairs. The perfect and the pluperfect form or tenses are the form of this category. What makes the pluperfect form distinct from the perfect is a more distant viewing the state of affairs than the perfect form. Well, if you're paying attention, you may ask, can Greek communicate a future tense of their verbal system, or is there any future tense or aspect to Greek? And yes, there is. Surprisingly, this aspect is actually the only aspect or tense that communicates on time. However, this aspect or text is the exception to the general rule. Shifting gears from aspects, the Greek verbs have different inflections depending on a subject in person and number, like English, except more in depth. The chart shown to the right is presented for reference, using the verb akuo or I hear. There are also inflections based on aspects form or tense of the word, such as the present form aluo or I loose. Insert the noun like a rope. I'm going to want to change this to an aorist form. I'll add an augment and in a sigma right before the ending to get elusa or aorist of I loose. And overall, when you are looking for verbs in a lexicon, the lexical form of the verb is the first person singular present indicative. So overall, I show an example of some definition like akuo. There's nothing additional over here because overall it's showing the singular present indicative form of the verb, and it's I hear. And an indicative here is supposed to be a mood in which the verb is being presented as of. And we'll be going over the indicative mood in the next lecture. And the thing is like, all right, you taught us the verbal system, but not really any Greek words or how they're formed, or probably because it will take a little too long. And the huge question is like, how is knowing how the Greek verb system useful in our devotions and reading the New Testaments? And overall, like my answer to that would be word studies. Is especially on verbs of the text. For example, in John 8:15, what does Jesus mean by judge? When he says, you judge according to the flesh, I judge no one. Like if Jesus judges no one, is there no final judgment since Jesus is God? First, the context is important, but also a word study might be pretty useful. So you find the Greek verse equivalent to it in Bible Hub, and ego ukrino udena will be concentrating on the second phrase here, and it will be going And then we further go to Bible Hub by looking at the word itself, krino, which is which is bold in our text, and overall is the second word down of judge, Jacob, and overall like the definition is very useful, but overall like the issue that they want here is the inflection, which is highlighted by or colored by this brown text. And the things you may notice, it's a present indicative active. And the things as you may know, since it's a present, since it's a present form of the verb, or like overall the present form is communicating that judging is an action which is in process or unfolding. So therefore, when Jesus is describing, I'm not judging in the present aspects, he's communicating that he's currently in the dialogue with the Pharisees, not participating or in the process or unfolding in the action of judging, and is not a state of affairs as the questioner is trying to demand. And in the days of, now before we go, let us look at the imperfect form of imi, which is the following: Imen, Ace, En, Imen, Ite, Ison. I also posted a part of the chapter on Greek verbs of the Google Drive going in detail into the topic. Anywho, we got one more week of Greek grammar before you have all the tools you need to do Greek word studies. See you next time.